Happy National Voter Registration Day, everyone. I'm James Russell. My pronouns are he and him, and my profession, and sometimes I think my life too, is journalism. I cover the legislature as well as architecture and drugs for multiple publications. And I would not recommend that you necessarily do all that combo. With that being said, let's go ahead and kick this off. I'd like everyone to first introduce themselves. We have three panelists here, all of whom I know well, but I would like you to know them better. Rebecca, could you start?
Of course. Hi, James. My name is Rebecca Marquez, and I go by she, her pronouns, and I'm the Texas State Director for the Human Rights Campaign.
And Ray?
Hey, y'all. My name is Ray Martinez, and I'm the Texas Rising Director for the Texas Freedom Network, and my pronouns are they, them.
And Emmett?
Hey, y'all. My name is Emmett Schilling. I am currently, my pronouns are he, him, his, and I'm currently the Executive Director for the Transgender Education Network of Texas, or TENT.
Perfect. All of y'all's organizations are in some way involved in elections, either in mobilizing people or, like in the case of Vote Texas, getting people registered to vote. And specifically when we're looking at young people who, according to the Williams Institute, tend to skew younger, there anything that when y'all have talked to these voters that you've stressed, like with young voters, like something like voter suppression or LGBTQ discrimination, or is that already understood to them? Would any of you like to speak to that? Y'all are full of knowledge.
Yeah, I can speak a little to that. Working with young people, and Texas Rising works with a lot of young people of color on college campuses across the state. When we're talking to young people across the state, there's a lot of different types of access points, right? Some folks are aware of what's happening and kind of are a little plugged in, others aren't, right? So there's kind of different motivating messages that work for young people. But I would say definitely, talking to young people about LGBTQIA issues, right? This is really important. So this is maybe, going to be one of the most important elections of our lifetime. We have a federal administration that's not great to LGBTQIA folks. We have Texas state legislature, and just our government here in general is like not very friendly to LGBTQIA folks either. And those are both very like motivating messages for young people, right? Young people want to make sure that LGBTQIA people, can secure, a house for rent, and not be discriminated on because they're trans, So I think that, that messaging is really important when we're talking to young people on the ground.
Rebecca, same question posed to you. Have you really been working with young voters, and what is kind of your role when you work in elections? You're in a little bit of a different position, I think, than some people, so.
Yeah, definitely. So, my role at HRC as a Texas State Director is that I lead our work across the state, really, with both on-the-ground organizers placed in Dallas, Fort Worth, Houston, San Antonio, and Austin, our steering committees, which are our volunteer structures, and our amazing state partners like TENT, like TFN and Texas Rising, and Equality Texas. And I lead our efforts both at the ballot box and at the legislature. So we really work all year round to advance LGBTQ rights in Texas. We don't specifically just work at Youth Vote, but we certainly do work with young voters. And just to echo Ray, I think, Ray just hit on so many amazing points. And I would just say that not only do we see, youth voters especially motivated to vote around LGBTQ issues, but really a whole widespread of issues rallying around marginalized folks. I think, we see a lot of excitement, not just to vote this cycle in November, to stop the bad harm that has happened to our country and to our communities, but also to really build and hope for a Texas that's better than we found it pre-COVID. So I think that that's really important message when we're talking to young voters to relay. And I think, one thing that we see is that peer-to-peer messaging are sometimes more important than, somebody from an organization or a politician necessarily doing it. So community-based outreach is critical, I think, to cycle.
And Emmett, here's your time to shine with the same question.
I think, given the state that we're in, it's pretty clear to trans folks, to non-binary folks, the importance of voting, the importance of engaging and getting an elected official that's going to really be there to understand the needs of their district, and then to head to Austin to really carry that out, and to really genuinely want to serve the district that they're running in these races to represent, and understand the community in terms of everyone within it, to understand that a community that is inclusive, is diverse, is respectful of one another, and committed to making that place a good place to be in, really results in a better state overall for all of us. And I think the other side of that too is just for young folks, especially. I have a 21-year-old, and every day, I'd say at least on average, like 3 to 5 times a day now, they do a fun thing where they read a newspaper headline that's really depressing. Apple doesn't fall too far from the tree, by the way. And then inform me how bleak and abysmal the future looks for the young folks, and threatens to point out all the ways that I'm basically like one breath away from a boomer. So I think when it comes to that, is really understanding that through the voting process, you harness your power. You put people in places to represent you, that are actually going to lead in a way that paves a better future for you, and for overall the well-being of the state that you want to live in.
Cool. On that point, and especially for Ray, considering how engaged you are, have college students had any particular barriers to voting? I that's not meant to be a loaded question. I imagine there are some, but have there been any issues you've had to address?
Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, just voting in general in Texas or like getting registered to vote in Texas has kind of been hard for a long time, for everybody. Um, um, and, specifically for college students, right? You can vote with a concealed handgun license, but you can't vote with your college ID, right? That's been something that's been highlighted for a long time, ever since voter ID got passed here in the state, or the requirement of voter ID in order to vote got passed here in the state. So that's been one hard piece that's been persistent, and that we've always had to have voter education about with our young people that we work with. Another thing that's been kind of like exacerbated by COVID-19 is the fact that the Texas State Legislature passed House Bill 1888 in the last legislative session, which removed the capacity for counties to have temporary polling locations. And so we've seen that effect close down a polling location at UTRGV Brownsville's campus, and at some other campuses across the state. And counties have been trying to work hard to try and make sure that they have like the funding to put something close to that area, right? Because sometimes it's a question about whether or not the county has the capacity to fund an election site. We've seen COVID-19 exacerbate buildings or rooms that college students have typically voted in. So like in Hays County, they did close the LBJ, the student center, where students have voted for a very long time at Texas State. So this has happened because the administration at that school needs that space in order to be socially distant. And so there's going to be another space that's not typically a polling location and is further away from like the center of the student body at Texas State. So yeah, I mean, COVID has exacerbated a lot of barriers that already existed for young people to vote.
Yeah, with Emmett too, have you received any word, for lack of a better term, gossip, rumors about anybody particularly facing barriers to voting within the trans or gender non-binary community, especially with how strict voter ID laws are in Texas?
The reality, I think, of why ID laws really, where there's requirements, where you're showing an ID, that don't just pertain to voting, right? Our areas of sort of unfortunate cases, and a lot of times for trans folks. In particular, where we're talking about voting, historically, the cases where we have heard and hearing the different sort of scenarios and how those played out. And one of the things that, is interesting to me is what we tell trans folks, non-binary folks in the state is actually to go prepared above and beyond, because the quicker that you can have your paperwork, the quicker that you can lay that out and sort of prevent whatever interaction is happening is really going to sort of be a harm reduction sort of component to that. If you can come over prepared and know exactly what your rights are, know exactly why you have extra documentation. And again, I really want to stress, like, it is not fair, it is not right. But when we talk about this, how do you engage the voting process and also like encourage trans folks, non-binary folks to do it with harm reduction in mind? Because at the end of the day, where this, overall gets tricky is it comes down to the single poll worker that you're having that interaction with. So whatever that bias is or is not, or whatever that interaction is in that moment is going to be make or break if a trans person is going to be able to vote or is going to be basically disenfranchised from exercising their right to vote. And also when we look into what does it look like when somebody starts a pattern of voting, what does it look like when somebody literally like physically leaves the polls? What is the likelihood for voting to become a component that is a priority for somebody to exercise within that system? And so really examining what does that look like, but also really flagging that this is a reality for trans folks of what does it look like, unfortunately, to be in a position where anytime if you have not had your legal documentation changed to reflect the name, gender, if that is part of your transition story, then essentially you're outing yourself every time you use an ID. And so and coming back and understanding how in particular this works with voting, but also understanding that this is a reality of life for trans folks, unfortunately.
It's so weird also thinking about this as an election year, as if we've already all gone through enough. Now we also have to think about voting and reminding our friends to vote and fill out the census. I mean, y'all, come on. It's a little bit overwhelming for me. What are y'all doing, if anything, to tell your supporters, tell your constituents that it's going to be okay? You should still vote. But have you had people flip out like, oh my God, am I going to be able to, like what you addressed, Rebecca, make it to the polls, much less go out and be alive? I don't know. Since this is kind of a doom and gloom moment too, it's something that probably should be addressed. And if you haven't addressed it, I'm glad that I'm finally bringing it up and putting y'all on the spot, obviously. Is that something, since Ray, again, this brilliant person, you just keep working with young people. Have you heard those kinds of concerns on top of them being like young people anyway? I was flipped out when I was 21 about nothing.
Yeah, I mean, people are concerned about the election right now, and that's, I mean, right now what we're doing is we're going to try our best to talk to as many young people of color across the state as we can, to make sure that they know everything that they need to go and vote this election cycle. So, you know, we're going to be talking to over, you know, 1.3 million voters across the 1.3 million young voters across the state via text. So we're going to be sending people text messages. Watch out. Yeah.
Thank you for not calling.
Yeah. Yeah, right. But we'll be sending a bunch of text messages, letting people know, you know, like, hey, these October 13th, you know, through October 30th is early vote, and election day is November 3rd. You know, we'll be giving them that information. We'll be talking to them about voter ID. We'll be making a plan with them, which is really fun, you know. So yeah, I mean, we're just going to try and make sure that young people of color are as prepared as they can be for election time, and we'll be walking them through that process. So I think it'll be okay. I think young people will take that and will run with it. I'm trusting young people this year. So
I would just like to thank Move Texas and Charlie, and as well as our guests, for delaying Emmett and I going to Luby's for our Blue Plate special. But of course, we are deeply engaged in the electoral process, and as someone who also covers it, I get great joy in seeing tons of people standing around in a line, or hopefully this year, just voting by mail. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us. Y'all are amazing. And Emmett, even though we're a couple of hours from each other, I'll see you at Luby's in Austin at like 10 a.m.
4 a.m.
4 a.m. Well, okay, Rebecca, Ray, well, I'll be there. Thanks, y'all.